Okay, perfect. Can y'all see my presentation okay? Yes, no, maybe. Let's
Now,
see. Okay, perfect. Um, I didn't want y'all to have to see all of my notes from a meeting that I was in earlier today. So, anywho, um, thank you so much for listening. I am going to talk about some project management stuff. And this were things that I learned in my PMP. So I just got my project management professional certification from Project Management International. So it's a fancy way of saying I know how to make a lot of documents now. But I wanted to share some things that I've learned that we've already implemented here at the university that have been super helpful, but just also some kind of questions and things to think about as you're getting started. So, I want to start first, though, and note that you can make this so much more complicated than it has to be. And so you can make this as streamlined or complicated as you do want to. I would just encourage you to think about what are the essential things to do and what do I really need to do in order to get the ball rolling. Think about this from your own institutional context. What works really great here at the University of Missouri may not work at your own institutions, but I just want to share some things that I would kind of recommend as some best practices. But I do want to note that you can make this super complicated super quickly. So just bear that in mind. Take what you need and leave the rest. But I do want to kind of level set first on what project management actually is, and kind of what it is that we're thinking about when you're thinking about using some of these processes. So the project part of it, it has to be things that are limited in scope. So that means you're not doing all of the things under the sun all at once. They need to be time bound and they need to be able to have a final deliverable. If it is not hitting these three boxes, you're probably thinking about a process. And so I would encourage you to kind of think about how can you limit the scope? How can you make sure it has a timeline and have that final deliverable? You can always do multiple iterations. You can build on things. You can build, like the projects can build on each other, but like really limit that scope down. You also want to think about things that are not ongoing. So again, that doesn't have a timeline or expansive with ever-changing requirements. So again, being able to limit those things down, limit your scope. I'm probably going to say that 15 million times, but it is very important. The management side of it is taking that project that is time bound. The it's got the scope requirements, it has that final deliverable, but then kind of layering these extra things. So understanding the risks associated with it. So what are potential things that could really help the project? What are things that could hinder that project? Um, and then also understanding what are the issues arising. So issues are things that are happening right this moment that are only going to hurt the project. But then also thinking about who are your stakeholders in this. So who has the power and influence to help or hinder your project. I'm going to talk all more about this, so don't worry. And then communication. So who needs to know what and why from your stakeholders list? That is going to save you a lot of time and headache in the future. So the project management is combining the technical skills of being able to define your project with the management of the people in the process. And then if you want to be able to define success, success is going to be meaning it came in before or on schedule, it was at or below budget. That could be time or money. And then it meets that deliverable specification. So really kind of thinking about how can you manage the process of it, the people with it, but also making sure things get done. So when you're thinking about the planning phase of it, and so this is like where you're like, I don't know where I want to go or where I want to start. There's a phrase that you'll hear project managers say where you're going to measure twice, cut once. The more you can do within the planning stage is really going to help you long term. So this is going to help save you time and money. It really allows you time to think about your like consult with people on campus, consult with those stakeholders, consult with those any extra offices that you might need to. Think about things that have succeeded and past projects that have failed. Are there any lessons that you can learn from those from previous iterations or things that have been done? But you really want to be able to think about those things, but then also be able to clearly have a problem statement. Your problem statement is going to be a succinct couple of sentences of like, what is the problem? How do we want to approach it? And then like who needs to be included? So that who can also include the stakeholders. So like who are the powers that be? And then the scope. When you want to be able to have that problem statement and then using that problem statement, you're going to think about who are the stakeholders. And so when I say stakeholders, it's going to be who is going to have the influence to control the resources, the influence who's going to be able to derail it if they don't want it to succeed, who's going to have a lot of interest in like the final deliverable. But then also who has power. So you may have people that have a high interest in seeing this project succeed, but they have low power, meaning they have low ability to derail or impede progress. But you might have the vice versa of like, I have high power, but I have really low interest in what that final deliverable is. So, for instance, I'll use my example that I use all the time. The president of our university, he has high power. He has high like ability to stop or continue progress, but he may not really have any interest in like what our final deliverable is when we're thinking about it from like the department standpoint. So, in using that stakeholder list, so you've thought about it, you thought about what's the level of power these people have, what is the level of influence that they could have on the project's outcomes. Think about how you want to communicate with them. Again, the president might have high power, low influence. He might just get updates from our vice chancellor as it's appropriate. I can use those relationships. I can let her update if she needs to. But if they have high level of power and high level of influence, I might need to make sure I'm getting regular updates to those people. If they have low levels of power or influence, I'm just making sure that they have access to those updates if they need to, but they don't necessarily have to be involved in the daily planning meetings or anything like that. So again, just kind of thinking through that level of power and influence is going to help you figure out what is the communication needs probably going to need to look like, and then also to who actually needs to be sitting in the room. Because, for instance, I'll use the example we are launching and working on a dashboard to capture student engagement outside the classroom. We generated a list of 40 people plus who could be considered stakeholders for this project. But when we thought about it from the level of who has the influence to impede progress, who has the influence to like stop people from working with us, and then also who has the power to control those resources, that list went from 40 plus to only 6 people that are going to be involved in regular planning meetings. And so it really helps you figure out who actually needs to be involved and then who actually can I just give regular updates to through other channels? Who can we use like relationships with just to share updates? It doesn't have to be 40 people at all times. The problem statement also can help set your project scope, clearly identifying what is in scope and out of scope. And as I mentioned before, you could say this is out of scope for now. Maybe in a future project, we'll think about this thing. But clearly identifying what you are and are not going to cover is going to help so much and tremendously. The problem statement will also help you identify the tasks. So, are there things that you're going to need to be able to work with other offices on? Who is going to be the final approver or whatever the deliverable is? Ideally, it should be somebody who is not you, so you're not having to make those final decisions. It's also nice because then you can escalate things if you need to. But who is going to be that final approver? Is it going to be a single person? Is it a committee? Whatever that might look like. And then two, using that tasks is going to help you kind of figure out if the final approvers need to be involved with the project. So again, is it just like they just want to see the completed thing, or is that something that they're going to be wanting to be involved with throughout the process? You'll also want to kind of think about the sequence for things. So again, can things be completed in parallel? So like if you're having to consult with IT and IR or all of those different groups, whoever that might be on your campus, those might be consultations that you can do in conjunction with everybody. Or you might need to be able to say, I have this question before the project can really get started based off of my task list. I need to get an answer from IT first before I go and ask other people for this. So you can kind of think about it in that's what I mean by a sequence. And so again, maybe you need to finish something before another can start. And then using that task list, you've thought about what order, you thought about what that might look like. The next step is going to be the estimation part. And this is, I will say, if you look it up later, project managers, they have like 5 different ways you can estimate it. There's formulas, there's math involved. You don't have to do that unless you really want to. I'm going to tell you right now, you don't have to do the math. But think about though how much time something might cost or money if there's a monetary aspect involved, because that time estimate of like ideally I would like it to be finished on this timeline or for my different tasks is going to help you figure out how long the project's going to run. Again, that's going to help with you figuring out what is my time commitment, things like that. But kind of think about what that estimate might look like. And then you're going to review and refine your schedule based off of that. And that's when you can start putting your tasks with dates and figuring out who do I need to consult with, who are the people, when are the people needing to be talked to, and things like that. Okay, the next thing to think about is going to be your risks. So, what do I mean by risks? So, risk can be positive or negative. Um, but I want you to think about what are potential threats to your project. What are things gonna that could derail it? So, again, I'll use my engagement dashboard example that we're doing here now. There's been a push for student organizations to not have up-to-date rosters. Well, that could be a threat to us figuring out and knowing who are the students that are involved outside the classroom and what are they involved in. And so that, if we're looking at that, that's a threat. That's going to have a high likelihood of happening just based off of who is leading that charge. And that's going to have a high impact on our project not succeeding the way we want it to. And so if it has a high impact and high probability, I would recommend you kind of think about what are the ways we want to tackle that if it does happen. So for example, for that threat, my supervisor is kind of leading the charge against that and explaining to the powers that be, why is it that we don't want this to happen? What are some ways we can figure out a best course of action? Things like that. I will also tell you though, you may think about threats and they could be things like, oh, an earthquake hits Columbia, Missouri. I'm not a geologist, but I can tell you all that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. So that would have a high impact on, students being involved outside the classroom, but that has a much lower probability. So if an earthquake happens, we'll cross that bridge if we have to, but we're not going to worry about trying to plan what is that course and like what are we going to do to kind of fix that if it happens. So really think about the things that are going to have a high impact but high probability of happening. I put down here avoid, mitigate, escalate, transfer, accept. Those are very project management terms, but like those are different ways you can approach a risk. Essentially, though, what they're saying is can we avoid it? So make sure it doesn't happen. Is there a way that we can reduce the impact, so mitigate it? Escalate it. So I'm escalating my risk to my boss, somebody that may have more power to approach it, make sure it doesn't happen. Transfer that risk to somebody else, aka you buy insurance, aka for my earthquake example, or you just accept it, and that's just going to be like if it happens, it happens, and we'll deal with it when it gets there. But I wanted to put the words down here just in case you were curious. And there's also positive risks. So, what are the opportunities? These are good things that are going to help your project ultimately. And again, you want to think about the high impact, high probability, and you really want to make sure those happen. So, those are the positive things that could come with it. So, again, for our dashboard example, more people are going to start tracking using our student engagement platform, which means more people are going to want to be able to see their data in there. And that's positive risk, and that has a high impact, and that has a really high probability of happening. So how can we make sure we exploit that and really make sure it happens and really get people excited and jazzed about it? So then more people are using our platform, which then increases our all of the positive things associated with it. Um, so those are kind of some overviews of the risks. And so you've thought a lot, you've reflected a lot. And then the next thing you're going to want to do is just recording it down. It does not have to be a special software. It does not have to be a specific format. You can use a Word document if you want. Microsoft Planner does have things in there if you want to use a planner. But I do recommend you at least reflect about all of this and like record it in one spot. You do not have to write a 10-page paper about every single one of these aspects. You do not need to like have this big, huge, crazy like web matrix thing, whatever format makes sense to you. But I do encourage you to record it because, again, it will help with communication in the future, especially if you're having to onboard people in the middle of the project. You have kind of those things together, but it also gives you a record and records it for the future. So then when you're done, you can look back and be like, did we hit what we were meant to do? Did we actually deliver our final deliverable? But then also too, were there lessons that I learned that I should have thought about when I was in the planning process, things like that. So then you've done a lot of reflecting, you've done a lot of recording, and then you're gonna actually work the plan. So that's when you're gonna use that sequence of tasks. That's gonna tell you how to work, when to work, and helps you keep track of like, is this actually working? So if you notice that you're getting off track, that's when you're gonna want to be able to kind of reevaluate and things like that. If you are getting off track, two questions I would ask yourselves. Is it due to more quote unquote things being added to the project? That means you might be experiencing what's called scope creep. So when you think about what was in scope, what was out of scope, you might need to reevaluate what's actually connected to your project, what may not be connected, what's actually relevant or not. And I will say sometimes you do have to have hard conversations or more uncomfortable conversations of being like, that's out of scope right now. I'm not saying we can't ever do it, but right now in this instance, we are not able to do that. Um, I've had to have those conversations a few times, and I will say they're not necessarily fun, but it does ensure that you're actually going to deliver your final deliverable on time. And then two, the next question to ask is it due to stakeholder involvement? You may have thought somebody was going to have a low interest in this project. Maybe they actually have a much higher interest. Maybe you need to adjust how they're being engaged in this project, who that person is, and like what is their level of involvement. So that's just another thing to kind of consider. So again, using your sequence of tasks, you've used your time estimations, that can kind of help you figure out, is this actually working or not? I also recommend that you review and update as you're going through. Also, kind of reviewing and updating your risks as you move up throughout the project. Your environment may change, your leadership may change, things might adjust. I know we probably experience that all in some level working in higher education. Things are never this perfect, sterile environment. But keeping an eye on your risks and like what are those things that are going to impede my project and hinder progress or things that are going to help so you can kind of keep and evaluate as you're going through. For your stakeholders, I also would mention making sure their communication needs are being met, especially for those people that have high interest and high power in your project. As you'll learn, some people are like, they may have high interest and high power, but they don't want to be involved in the project. That's okay, but I'm still going to send you regular updates. Did those shift? Did you fall down on that high power, high interest matrix? Maybe you need to be moved somewhere else and involved in a different way. Whatever that might look like for your project. And then two, reevaluating your task estimates. Sometimes things can take more time. As you know, sometimes you can't get a straight answer out of IT if you're trying to ask them a question. Or you may realize I was asking this question and I got the answer, but I was not asking the right question or whatever that might look like. So you can kind of reevaluate and adjust your timelines there. But I will tell you some advice from me as I've been doing this is do not feel like you have to have this perfect laid out plan before you get started. Feel free and be willing to launch at 40%. Figure out as much as you can at the front end, but also know you're going to go back in and revise as you're going through. I would also be really open to iterations. So, again, thinking about scope, thinking about what's going to happen, be willing to set that very low minimum iteration. It's called minimum viable product in the business and IT world / project management world. But like, what is the minimum that I need in order to be successful? I'm going to start there and I can always add on to it as I keep going. But also be willing to adapt to your environment and institutional context because I do think too, again, what I learned and like what I practice here at Mizzou is not necessarily going to work at Colorado State with Stephanie or necessarily going to work at other institutions. So know what's going to work for your institutional context. So take stuff, test it, and if it works, great, keep it, but don't be afraid to like throw something out. I would also recommend setting a common language no matter what. So if you're going to call something something, make sure everybody is calling it the same thing because there's nothing worse than everybody having five different definitions of a word and you're trying to figure out what the heck is it we're talking about. And then two, level setting expectations. I think again that goes back to that idea of scope and like what's going to be included in this first round, what's going to be included in the second round if we need to. But keeping and level setting expectations so everybody's on the same page. And then two, I would also encourage you to keep track of any lessons learned as you go through different projects in different instances. Where you do that, again, is up to you. Mine is this blob of sticky notes back here for different projects, but it is helpful because then too, if this is a reoccurring project, so say you're going to have multiple of the same deliverables, it helps you figure out, okay, this worked really great last time. Am I going to need to adjust for this next go round and things like that. Anyways, I said a lot of words. So what questions do you have? I have some also additional resources that I can share in a second, but I did want to hear what questions y'all had first, if any.
Jessie, I have a question. You were talking about process versus product,
Mm-hmm.
and I totally understand you, and I can see how that would be difficult to figure out because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of what we're all trying to do is a little of both, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
might be trying to use Microsoft or some other tools to create something that then we
Mm-hmm.
will roll into a process.
Yep.
So I wonder if you might talk a little bit more about that or like how you've done that at your institution.
Yeah. I think yes, I think that's a great question. And I think it's easy for things to slip into both, for sure. I think for me, the way I'm thinking about it is so for instance, I'll use that tracking system that I developed, right? And so that is technically a process that is the assessment cycle that is done on an annual basis, that is reoccurring, things like that. But my product was I wanted to figure out how to track our strategic plan. So, like, ultimately, tracking our strategic plan visually was my product. So, like, the other parts came along with that as I was figuring that out. But, like, my final deliverable was a visualization of our strategic plan. Um, so when you're thinking about it, it's like you may have process components that are going to fit into that product, but it's going to be what is that final thing. So is it going to be a visualization of all of these things together? Is it going to be, I want to be able to show this on a table or chart? Is it going to be whatever that might look like? I don't know if that really answered your question, Stephanie. Let me know if it did not, but that's the way I kind of conceptualize it.
I think probably others of us are also trying to figure out, like, even if we create a thing, this
Mm-hmm.
product, like, it's not over. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we will be asking people to use the thing. We'll have to
Yep.
do improvements on that. I mean, one of the things that trips me up about the project I'm thinking of is how to maintain it year to year. Like I could see
Mm-hmm.
it working once, like that first year after the product is created, but
Mm-hmm.
then how does a year to year process work and what needs to be done year to year to the product? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't know. I guess the two things kind of they mush into each other.
They definitely can. And something too, that's where I think the iterations comes in. So thinking about it from, okay, my final product deliverable for this 1 year. Okay, great. What worked well? So that's where those lessons learned come in. So what worked well? What didn't work well? What refinements do I need to make? Who do I need to involve in those refinements? And then my next product is going to be, what is that next year is going to look like? Does that make more sense? Yeah, that's the way I would think about it. But I think Erica, you put your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna share because I think like this distinction between product and process or project and process
Mm-hmm.
was like also when I went through various like project management things, I was like, this isn't exactly what I need. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember bringing, so this is like a fun anecdote. Well, I think it is anyway. I was doing my project management class or whatever, and I brought an assessment process oriented project. It wasn't a process, it was definitely a project, had a
Mm-hmm.
time, date, deliverable, all the things. And like my teacher was like, I can't help you with this because I don't know. Like, couldn't you just design an app? Like, if we were designing an app, this would be
Yeah.
easier for me to give you feedback. And I'm like, right, no, I'm not designing an app. Like,
Yeah.
sorry, like I'm not like building a building or
Mm-hmm.
like opening a park or making some
Right.
tech product. Like this is, not my thing. And just throughout that course, kind of that distinction between a project and a process like came up over and over and over
Hmm.
because a process really isn't a bunch of little projects piled on top of each other over time. Right. I don't think that's what a process, I mean, that's a way to approach it to still like translate some of the valuable tools of project management. But process has to sort of, um, I think like process has some kind of other richness to it. It has something that is like unending to it that I think is important. And if we're just sort of constantly sort of chasing like here's the deliverable
Yeah.
in an assessment context, when and I think about this for the project that I'm using or that I have in mind. I think that putting too much emphasis on the deliverable in assessment is particularly challenging because our stakeholders will then start to prioritize the report over the actual engagement and the
Hmm.
thinking and the curiosity that is supposed to sort of undergird what assessment ideally is. That assessment isn't just about writing a bunch of reports and like putting
Yeah.
them in the report portal and things like that. And so I have a tendency to yeah, just sort of again, I just want to like reemphasize like that balance is really important. And I think there are definitely assessment projects, right? Like
Yeah.
anytime I'm working with a new program, we're doing an assessment project where we have a clear goal, we define who the stakeholders are, we have a deliverable at the end. But after that happens, we shift into the messier process territory. And I think like that's okay. It's okay for it to live there, that after the initial lift, it becomes something different.
Yeah. And I think too, it's also that's the point I was trying to make about what works for your institutional context. Like what works for me is not necessarily going to work for you. Um, and I do think it's important to note the difference between the two and thinking about it like because I think ultimately a lot of us, yes, there is the process, like you were saying, the richness of it, and also there are deliverables from it, and are there ways that we can enhance those and improve those as we're going through. But I do think too, the translation of project management in an education realm is not perfect, and it is not 100% accurate, as I can tell you from like my dad's a project manager, and so like me trying to explain how I'm using something is kind of like the like I'm not using it in the 100% textbook definition way, the way that like PMI taught me or whatever. And that's what's going to work for my institutional context. But I do think there's a lot of value in like knowing what these things are because we do so much of this day to day. And there's a lot of things that I think from project management that can improve the way we approach our work and make it more efficient. Because especially when you think about like the stakeholder piece, again, like being able to take a list of 50 plus people essentially and narrow it down to six, that has some big impacts on like scheduling that is very practical, scheduling and logistics, but also on the who actually needs to be in the room to have those conversations for sure. Yeah. But Sherry, what questions did you have?
I was just going to add to the response for Stephanie from my own perspective, and it's definitely the blind leading the blind, right? Like I'm still in process of learning all of this, but I went down the path, and Jessie knows this. She was so kind to meet with me earlier this week and like play show and tell and answer some questions for me. But I've created a SharePoint site and I have this goal of setting up so that my programs have a space to do their assessment work. And I consider it a project to finalize the first iteration of that for one college on campus, right? And then I'm going to declare success with my project. But I'm also then from that point going to have to duplicate that for every other college on campus and roll it out to all the colleges and do all those things. So in my mind, the differentiation and that's just completely arbitrary. That's just me saying, when am I going to know that this site is finished and it's ready for the general public to view and begin to use? And when we're at that stage, then that's the end of that particular project. And then I have a new project to tackle. And then there's always going to be like maintaining the site and adding resources and those types of things. But for my own sanity, I have to declare a final, like, okay, I did that thing. It's done and it's ready. And now I'm ready to go on to the next thing. And that just, I mean, honestly, it gives me also like a sense of accomplishment that I really, really need in this
Mm-hmm.
big, big job that I have to do.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions that exist or are bubbling?
There was one in the chat that maybe you
Oh,
want to
I
tackle.
did not see that. I am
Yep.
happy to. Thank you for mentioning that because that is on another side and I can't see that. Um, let's see. Joanna, you were asking for what tools for managing the assessment process. Can you clarify that a little bit for me? I didn't know if you meant like the assessment cycle or from like a
Hi, yes.
Hi. Yeah.
I was just thinking, are there any tools that you would recommend that maybe have not been mentioned before? I know we talked about lists and
Mhm.
SharePoint, obviously,
Mhm.
and things like that, but to kind of make that the assessment, leading the assessment process and with the communication that's on a cadence and people kind of knowing what to expect. If there's anything that you'd recommend that
Yeah.
I'm willing to try. I know that there was a session that I once attended about Planner,
Mhm.
and Planner I know can do a lot of things, but the
Mhm.
problem is that it is kind of overwhelming then, and not everybody knows how to use it.
Yeah. I don't have any hard and fast, like this is the best way to do it personally. We do use lists, we do use some I have some like template emails and stuff like that. But I mean, quite honestly, I'm reaching to grab it. It is not very pretty, but it is truly just a piece of paper with me keeping track of who I've met with and who I haven't as an office. So like it's not anything perfect, but I'm sure that other people have some other ideas, and also too, we will have that process session in April. So
Thank you. I'm good with paper too.
yeah. And then Sarah, to your question, I mean, I do think like Sherry mentioned, like if you have any committee or advisory group, I would definitely use them as a test group. And then too, I think um the other things is involving people as you can in the process, like at certain points. So if you've gotten to the point where you're like, okay, I think this is an example of a feature, we were developing it. If you are able to involve any of those end users in that product testing and feedback, even if it's a smaller group, I would definitely recommend that. That's something that process is called iterative project management or agile, if you've ever heard that phrase before. But basically, it's where you work on a specific set of features. Sometimes they're called user stories, and then you give it back to that end customer to be like, what works, what doesn't work. You get feedback, you adjust what it is you're going to work on next, and then you work on it in iterative process. Um, that's the way we're approaching developing our student engagement dashboard, just because then we can work on it with those end users in mind and actually make sure it's something that is actually going to be helpful and useful for them. So if you have any ability to do that, I would definitely recommend doing that. But especially too, as you're thinking about what is that problem statement and like who is it potentially that would need to be involved or use, like what's the goal? Um, those are also good points where you could involve them in the process.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Um, but yeah, if there's any other questions, let me know. But I did want to share, and then I can send this on the listserv as well. But if you're thinking about like wanting more information or if you want a deeper dive, because I kind of scratched the surface barely, PMI has a ton, and so I have some stuff down there. But If you're specifically thinking about like how do I do the stakeholder interest piece, I would really recommend that you think about power and interest grids. I just put the phrase up here. I'm happy to explain what any of these mean, but just so you knew what to Google, or if you wanted to be able to look something up. It's going to be stakeholder management. Power and interest grids are going to be how you're going to want to look at that. If you're thinking about how do I actually think about project tests, tasks, and estimating work, you can get really granular with what's called a work breakdown structure. And it's where everything is broken up into 8-hour increments. It kind of rolls up, and you can use that to estimate, but then also project estimation. So those different ways of estimating tasks. That is where you do get into math. So I do just like want to say that and throw that out there as a PSA. But if you're thinking about risks and issues, if you want to think more about that, that's going to be specifically risk management. You're going to want to think about probability and impact calculations. And then if you're like general project management, I do really recommend PMI has a lot of resources that are free. You can become a member. It is free to become like you can sign up for an account for free. You do have to pay to become an actual member. But they do have some free online resources. And then they also recently launched what's called Kickoff. And that is kind of like an intro to project management overall. And it kind of introduces you to those terms. And I believe that there's some templates built in to that as well. And then Rebecca, as she plugged right there, I have not taken Kickoff, but she is a former PMI employee. So we have the best of the best with us. So thank you so much for letting me know, Rebecca, that it's good. Because again, it is super helpful. And I also say too, as I mentioned before, I do not do things the way that PMI prescribes you to do. Sorry, Rebecca. And also like I do things that work for my own institutional context. So like take what works, take what doesn't work. But I do find that it is super helpful. And again, just like level setting those expectations and making sure that we're all on the same page. We all know what's expected of everybody. We know what is the end goal, what we're working towards. And then again, to that scope piece, that's already come up a lot with that engagement dashboard because again, people get really excited. They want to add all of these things to it, and that's really great. And this is what we're focusing on right now, and then we can think about future iterations. So, but I will share this out on the listserv. But any other questions or anything else that I can answer? Okay, perfect. I will stop sharing my screen.
Jessie, you probably weren't prepared to do this, but I know you've talked before about mapping your project, and I wonder if there's anything you can share with us about how you approached that. And sorry for just saying that now.
No, you're fine. Yeah, I can definitely talk about that. Hold on. So we did some process and project mapping over this past summer. I've got to pull up the app that I used that for. So we did it in a couple of different ways. One, when we were trying to figure out what and how our processes and all worked together as an office. We were doing what's called a systems context diagram. And if there are any engineers in the room, I probably did that not fully correct, but I did what worked well for us. And then let's see if I can get it to open. But essentially, what we did is we mapped the flow of information through our offices. I used a tool called XMind. There are many other, it's just a mind mapping software, but it is just what worked well for us. But it was helpful to kind of visualize the work that our office does in many different categories and across different contexts. Because again, we are a shared, well, actually no longer anymore. We report directly to the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs. We are an office of now 4, but we serve the entire division, but we also work on projects that are for the larger university overall. So this is a little out of date, but this can kind of show you. So we were kind of looking at first, okay, can y'all see that okay? We were looking at what are all of the things that we do, what are the buckets that they're in, what things go into that. So we looked at it overall from an idea of, so we were looking at our assessment cycle stuff. So like what actually happens, what are the different things within that, what are the different systems that we use, what systems feed into the impact report. All of these are color coded too, by the way. I will explain the colors in a second. How does that feed into planning and design, capacity building, internal consultations, those assessment meetings? What are some of those big surveys that we do? Those are all right here. And then who do those get reported to? So the blue is the different stakeholders and groups. So we also did that for like our external consultations. So my supervisor, she helped with our HLC accreditation. We have those external stakeholders and partnerships. So again, what are those data sources? What are the tasks kind of things that are big bucketed attached to that? How do we help with survey implementation? So you can see all of that feeds off of that. And then data, so like what are those buckets? And then the strategic planning buckets as well. So we did that. First, we just did it on some sticky notes, and then I'm gonna see if I can pull up, hold on, let's see if I can find it. Hold on, I do not want to save my changes. If you give me 2 seconds, I'm gonna look, and we did that again, but then we did it with the overview of the flow of information. And yes, it is called XMind. And we did it with that flow of information on top of it. It is a little insane if I can find where the file is, but that was also kind of helpful again to think about what is, so here are the things that we do, here are the groups that we do them with, and what is the flow of information as we're going through that. Because that was kind of crazy to see how different things interacted with different entities. But we did that just to kind of figure out again, what is it that we do on a daily basis? How do we communicate that? But also, what are the products? Again, what are the products and deliverables that come out of our office? So then when we're thinking about what are the different systems that we need to work with, this was also when we were trying to, at the beginning, think about what are the different systems that we have within our Division of Student Affairs. We're working through data governance processes for all of our different data systems as well, working with our data governance officer for the university. So that was also part of that. I cannot find my relationship one right off, but I can continue to hunt for it. I'm happy to show that if that's helpful. But that was also useful and interesting to think about because, again, the idea of that system context diagram is to think about what is the way that people interact with the system, what is that flow of information, and then what truly needs to speak to different things, or is it just something that anecdotally we can say has a relationship? That was all really helpful for me as I was thinking about building what became our semantic model for our strategic planning visual like dashboard, because again, it helped me narrow down and kind of set that scope of what do we actually need to include in here versus what is out of scope and not needed.
Yeah, I wonder if anybody else in the group right now has used some kind of mapping like this, and how you did it. And maybe it doesn't look exactly like this, but even if you're mapping sort of people and processes, the reporting structure, has anybody else done any of that? Yeah, Sherry and Erica, you want to just tell us what you did, or?
I'll tell you, so one of the many things that I had to take over responsibility for is getting our course evaluations out the door, with no instructions. That my predecessor didn't hand me anything. So I was trying in the dark to figure out, okay, how do I get the information I need to set it up? How do I set it up? So just working through that process was super helpful for me. And I started off with like this list of like, do this, do this, do this. And I'm like, this is going to be 18 miles long. I can't understand it. I don't know how. And I think a whole lot in my role about the handoff of what I'm doing to whoever is going to come next after me. Because I'm an old lady and I'm not going to do this forever. So I want to be prepared to hand it off. So I used Microsoft Whiteboard, and I started building a like workflow and a decision tree that branched off and everything like that. And the actual work of building it was just as important as the end picture I had of what the process was, because I learned a lot about what I needed to do, and then I had to go back to people and ask questions and create it. But now I have an SOP, but it has a visual that is real. So when I have to show this to somebody else, I'm just going to be able to say, like, here it is, here's the instructions. I'll walk you through it, but they'll be able to follow the flow of it really easily.
Yeah, I'll share that what I have built. So what Jesse shared looked like it was kind of mapping a lot of different operations that were happening in the context of a single unit, right? You had like different aspects of your survey, deployment, assessment of different units in the division and things like that. So I haven't done a process mapping for the entire brain. I'm also a unit of one, so the entire
Mhm.
brain is mine. So
Right.
but I've done different mappings for different aspects of assessment processes that I felt were important to share with different audiences. So I think a good flow chart really just like totally clarifies a lot of things. I think someone put in the chat that they've used Visio. I've used Lucid Chart, which is like I think a Google product, but I know that Visio is meant to be the sort of like counterpart to Lucid Chart. Um, and I've done that for different aspects of like the assessment data management process. So how we go from um, whether it's the Canvas LMS or
Mhm.
Gradescope, wherever the heck the data lives, to basically like the finished dashboard in Power BI and like the different contingencies and stuff that are required for all the different steps in the process. I think what would be nice is like if you could merge a flow chart with Planner in a way that,
Yeah.
because with Planner you have like these little cards and you like move the little card from like block to block, and that's all very sweet. But
Yeah.
it would be really nice to be able to like kind of pinpoint like with more than just like a static icon, like this is where we are, like in the flowchart process, like we're here. And to move out of here, we need to have these things happen. And so, you know what I mean? And to like
Mhm.
then assign to do like if Big Brother's listening, like merge with Visio and Planner, please, we beg you. Like,
Fun.
thanks.
Yes. I really wanted to use Visio actually, but we, for whatever reason, don't have it in our license for Microsoft. And like what I did have access to was like super limited. So that's also why I had to go look for external sources. Um, but yes, I did find my relationships one. If you do want to see it, it does look a little chaotic. I'm not gonna lie. And my team, when I finally showed them to it, I'll show it to y'all real quick. They're like, "Oh, we do a lot," and I was like, "Yeah, we do." Um, it does look insane. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, so looks insane, is a little crazy, but it did show some things that we were like, yeah, this is outside of our scope. We don't need to worry about that for our internal tracking tool. So for example, the learning to accreditation piece, out of scope. The student success to Mizzou goals or is out of scope. Um, I named all of these. Thinking about like the tracking departmental comprehensive program reviews out of scope. So it was a helpful exercise just to think what is within our things that we do and also helps figure out scope. But yeah, it looked insane. It felt insane while I was making it. And I was like, okay, great. But yeah, a little crazy.
Jesse, I just want to say you sharing that is helpful. And it also, I know I sent out in the listserv, and thanks Stephanie and others for responding who did, about my question with like figuring out how to evaluate our use of planning module
Yeah.
and whether to abandon it or not, basically, because we don't have defined criteria for like the ongoing review of whether technology is
Right.
working as we wanted it to, right? You have the RFP process, and then you just use it until you realize something's not working. But how do you
Right.
evaluate continuously? But we are having a meeting on Friday that, for the first time, is including OTS before, which is our IT people.
Yeah.
Every other meeting we've had so far has been the people managing the actual tools, and
Right.
somehow, like, we haven't been able to get them involved, and they have totally different view of things, have been apparently talking to Anthology without any of us talking to Anthology. And so it's like, who is the decision maker? But
Right.
like that type of mapping and like having the
Yeah.
people at the top all be on the same page so that we can
Right.
all make decisions together on bundled contracts is really difficult. And so
Yeah.
being able to do that and having the buy-in of people high up enough that to know, and like,
Mhm.
it's hard. So anyone who else is going, just commiseration and like appreciation, and I'll share what I learned from our process when we get there.
Yeah, for sure. But no, that is definitely difficult. Yeah, I think even just showing this to our vice chancellor I know when Ashley showed it to her during one of their meetings, she like was like, "Oh, y'all need to start saying no to things." It's like it was just again like helpful to have that like, "Oh, we are all doing these different things in different buckets, but also they all work together. We got to figure out a way we can bring it all together." But yeah, it's tough. Any other questions or anything else I can answer? I'm happy to also answer. If you wanted to shoot me an email, you're also welcome to do that. But again, I gave you a very high overview. I highly recommend deep diving a little bit more, figuring out what it is you actually need within your process or within your project management process, I should say, or like what your campus needs. But I do think that there's a lot of super helpful tools and just kind of figuring out the best way to adapt it for your higher ed institutional context is really the main thing.
Okay, we'll have a couple of members sharing